it's John from Heroes and Legends, so welcome to part 2 of our 5-part Hour Devastation full set review. Today we're going to look at all of the blue cards. We're also going to look at some of the multicolor, as well as a few artifacts and a few non-basic lands too, just to try to keep up and get this completed in 5 parts as opposed to 6, considering it's a small set. Now, if you're familiar with the series, you kind of know what to expect here. We're going to look at each card, and we're going to examine them first off in the scope of Limited. We're going to be talking about Draft and Sealed first and foremost. However, if a card does have the ability to perhaps cross over into other formats like Standard or Commander or Modern, what have you, we will definitely make note of that. Now, quickly before we get started, if you check out the description below, you'll find a couple ways to help support the channel, one of which is our Amazon affiliate store. If you make any purchases there, a small percentage will come back to help us out. You'll also find our Patreon page linked below as well. Both are always appreciated. Having said that, let's get into the cards for today. And we'll begin with Aerial Guide. A pretty simple card. I don't have a whole lot to say about it. I mean, it's very playable in Draft and Sealed. It's not necessarily a first or second or third pick or anything like that, but it's a good utility card. It's a 2/2 for 3. I mean, with flying, that's relatively economical. And the fact that it can give something else flying when it attacks is kind of nice. Especially if maybe you're in like Simic colors and you have some big green beaters that just can't get by later in the game. You can give them flying, maybe get some more damage across. Very decent card. Even Reed Stalker, another very decent utility card, like a nice curve filler for Draft and for Sealed. Not a lot to say about it. I mean, it's a 2/3 flyer. It does cost 4, but it does give you flash, and that kind of makes up for it. Champion of Wits. This one's interesting. This one's a rare, and I do like the card. Eternalized cost feels a little heavy for me when it comes to Standard, but let's talk about Limited first. I actually really like this card for Limited. I could see this being a high pick in Draft. Maybe not first pick, but definitely within the first few, depending on the pack. But here's what I like about it. Simply, it's a 3-drop. It's only a 2/1, but it allows you to loot twice when this enters the battlefield. And looting is awesome, but also, too, especially if you're playing blue-black, there's a lot of advantages you can have from discarding cards. So sometimes that will be relevant in itself. The Eternalize is nice because even though, yes, this is a little fragile, it's a 2/1, later in the game you can bring it back. It comes back for 7 mana. It's a 4/4 that lets you actually draw 4 cards and then discard 2. Again, you're getting card advantage at that point. You're also getting to look at more cards, discard, which sometimes can be an advantage, sometimes it won't. But regardless, overall, it's doing a lot of good things for you in the world of Limited. I don't know about Standard right now. One of the things that you're going to hear me say probably a number of times as we go through the cards today is blue, especially blue control, is in a really good spot right now. And it's hard to shoehorn more good cards into that deck. So a card has to be really good to make that leap. And I'm sure we'll look at 1 or 2 today that I think can get there. This one, I don't know if it will, quite honestly. I feel like it's a nice ability for 3, but there's just some better stuff out there right now when you start looking at 3, 4 drops and stuff like that, and the Eternalize feels a little too expensive. Countervailing wins. Fine counterspell for Limited. Again, not a lot for me to say about it. There's better ones that are going to be more reliable when it comes to Standard, but for your Limited game, again, Draft or Sealed, not a super high draft pick, but you can probably pick it up mid to even sometimes late in a pack, and it'll be just fine for you. I like that you can cycle it away. And it is dependent on what's in your graveyard, but blue has a lot of discard effects, especially blue-black. This will be especially good. Cunning Survivor. So here's one of the cards that is enhanced if you're cycling or discarding. Again, this is a Demir thing, definitely in the Limited world of Amonkhet / Hour of Devastation. But blue has enough cycling and enough discard that even if you're not playing black, this might still be worth playing. On its own, it's a fine blocker. I mean, sometimes you need 2 drops, 1/3 2-drop. Blue likes to have blockers, slow down the game a little bit. Very, very playable in your Limited setups. Eternal of Harsh Truths. This one, again, 3 casting cost, 1/3, so not quite as economical as the last card at first. However, I like the Afflict 2. I like the fact that if it attacks and isn't blocked, you get to draw a card. Now, your opponent gets put in a weird spot where they don't want to let this get by, even though it would only do 1 damage to them, because they don't want you drawing cards, which means they may have to block it and take 2 damage instead. So again, it's not a card that's like super crazy or anything, but it's a nice curve filler. There's nothing wrong with playing this in either Sealed or Draft. Fraying Sanity. This one's caught my attention. Now, let's talk about Limited first. Milling is a strategy. more so probably in draft than sealed. You are going up against a 40-card deck. The only way I would even consider going that route probably is if I opened this early on in the first pack and thought I could draft a lot of other support for it. I'm still nervous about that concept though, just because, again, there's a lot of cards that can be played out of the graveyard in this set. You might be helping your opponent to some extent. And if you stumble at all, you could actually be doing more harm than good. So that doesn't feel great. Not to say that you won't get that dream draft where you can really put an amazing mill deck together, but I think that's going to be pretty rare. This card has caught my attention, though, for Standard. There almost always is kind of like that zany deck that comes out of week 1 that you see at the Star City Games Open. Most of the time it kind of fades away week 2, week 3. But could there be a mill deck really led by this card? I would be very surprised if someone doesn't try to pull it off that first week at the Star City Games Open. So I guess we'll wait and see. And who knows? Maybe it turns out to be good. A lot of times those decks don't quite come together in a very consistent way where they can win often enough. But I guess we'll have to wait and see. It's definitely something to think about and try to brew, though. Hour of Eternity. This card's interesting. Let's talk about Limited first. It's just fine for you in Limited as long as you can swing the 3 blue color requirement. And look at it this way. It's expensive, but you're paying 5 to eternalize something in a graveyard. In your graveyard. So that's fine for 5. If you feel comfortable with the 3 blue, so for example, you're in maybe a 2-color deck, as long as blue is one of your primary colors, you're fine. If you're trying to get greedy, maybe go 3, splash something, or splash blue, then yeah, you don't want to necessarily touch this card because you're not going to be able to consistently cast it. But between all the discard effects and stuff in blue, and the fact that you got some good entrance battlefield effects and stuff like that going on, this card's definitely worth running. Maybe it's not my first pick, but if I know I'm solid in blue, I don't mind picking it up in a draft. As far as Standard goes, I just think it's a little too expensive for what it's doing. I will say Commander is another place, though, where this could excel, because you do have access to faster mana there. Imaginary Threats. This one's a little weird to me. I like the abilities that blue has to tap down a couple creatures, and they don't untap next time, or sometimes tap down all your opponent's creatures, and they don't untap next time. You get a lot of value for those. This is trying to do something similar, but instead of just simply tapping them down, it's forcing them to attack, and then after that, they don't untap next turn. So sometimes that's good for you because you can stand the attack, and the snapback could maybe even take out your opponent. But sometimes it's bad for you because you just can't afford to take that damage, right? So, I don't know. It becomes a little situational for me. You can cycle it away, though, which is kind of nice, too. So you're not completely punished for running the card. But I don't know. I find it kind of unique and interesting, but I don't know if I would see myself running it, especially for 4 mana, 2 on color. I just think usually I'll have better things to run. Jace's Defeat. Fantastic sideboard card, whether you're playing sealed, draft, or standard. I think especially in standard, when you look at some of these control decks, pulling this out of the sideboard in the mirror matchups, this card will be phenomenal for you there. Same goes for the limited game. Wait and see what your opponent's playing. If they're playing blue, yeah, go ahead and side this in. Huge value, hard counterspell for a blue 1/1. Yeah, unfortunately, there's no Jaces in the limited game to target, but that's okay. It's really about the counterspell efficiency here. Kefnit's Last Word. I like stealing stuff. It can be really good in limited games. Even cubes. Look at power cubes. I mean, they run cards like Treachery and Control Magic. A lot of times they're really good. So, could this card be really good in limited? I think it can be, even with the drawback. The drawback is a big deal. Don't get me wrong. Especially considering this costs 4 and 2 on color. So, 4 of your lands, at least, aren't going to untap next time around. But the ability to really skew the board by taking your opponent's best thing away and giving it to yourself can't be understated. So, is this a first pick? I would first pick it. Now, I want to see how this plays. I don't want to completely commit to this card until I get my hands on it, quite honestly, and see how it feels. But to me, even if it's slowing me down next turn, it still feels worth it, and I still think it's a real high pick. Nimble Obstructionist. Now, this is an easy first pick for me. This card's phenomenal. First off, there's a lot of correlation between this card and Vendilion Click. Now, Click's doing something very, very different. This card has a special ability too. It's doing something else. It's also very good, though. Maybe not quite as good as Click's, but it's still very good. So let's break this down a little bit. First off, one of the things that makes Click so good is it's a 3/1 flyer with flash for 3. It just kind of comes out of nowhere and puts pressure on the opponent, or in some cases puts pressure on their planeswalkers. That's very, very important. So as far as the secondary ability goes, yeah, I'd probably like Click's better, but this one I can cycle away for 3 if I need to, and if I do, I Stifle. Stifle's a great effect, or, you know, probably more recently as part of the disallow effect. That can be very, very powerful. A lot of people don't play around that. You stifle something and it really messes up their whole game plan and gives you a unique advantage. So, yeah, this card's awesome. I'm happy to first pick this in draft. Ecstatic to see it in my sealed pool. This will definitely see standard play. This is one of those blue cards that can definitely cross over easily into standard, I think. This could even possibly see modern play. I think it's that good. Ominous Sphinx. Great card from Limited. There's not a lot for me to say about it. Basically, what I like about it is it's a 4/4 for 5 with flying. Yeah, blue can use that. They'll be happy to use it. The secondary ability, again, it does give you an advantage when you cycle or discard. It's not a great advantage, but it does make combat more difficult for your opponent because you can simply bluff them if you have mana up, and they have to really think about their combat. And that alone makes this card extra good for 5 mana, but even if it was just a 4/4 flyer for 5, I'd probably still play it. Proven Combatant. Well, this one I'm not excited about. Here's my problem with it. It doesn't do enough for its 1-drop. A 1/1 for 1 is just not thrilling to me. Yeah, you could argue, well, if I'm not doing this on turn 1, then I'm doing nothing on turn 1. Well, that's true, but I'd rather do nothing on turn 1 and have a better 2 or 3 drop than run this in my deck and take up the spot with it. The second problem is the Eternalize cost is just too expensive for a 4/4. I don't want to pay 6 for a 4/4, and I don't want to pay 1 for a 1/1. So, I don't know. This card just doesn't fit anywhere. I'm just plain not playing it. Riddle Form. This one is very unique, and I actually like it a lot because it's cheap. An enchantment doesn't do anything necessarily on its own. Usually that's a recipe for disaster for me, but it only costs 2. If I can throw this down on turn 2, and then if nothing else is a mana sink as I move through the game to scry 1, I'm happy with that. Oh, by the way, every once in a while it becomes a 3/3 creature that I might be able to attack in with flying. That's actually kind of awesome. There's enough upside here that I'm happy, but I think I'd still play it if it was just a blue 1, pay a blue and 2, scry 1. If that was all the card said, I think I'd still do it. Seer of the Last Tomorrow. Well, here's another mill card. Notice, though, this one has an activation cost with a discard. So, again, sometimes that does play to your favor in blue and maybe even blue-black. So, it's definitely worth noting. Again, if you're trying to go mill, which I don't know if I'd recommend, this is definitely one of the key cards for that particular archetype. Sinwith Striker. This one I like for limited purposes. Now, here's the thing. It's a 2/2 with that +1/-1 ability for 3. Like, on its own, not super exciting, but I like the Eternalize here. And look at it this way. One of the issues sometimes with Eternalize is you have trouble with these small Eternalized creatures getting them killed. So in this case, if you really need to, you can just pay 2 blue mana and kill it on your own. And that's kind of nice. Now, it costs 5 and discard a card to bring back, which sometimes will be a drawback, but sometimes it won't be, like we've seen previously. So that's actually pretty interesting in some builds. And when it comes back as a 4/4 with the +1/-1 ability, now that's pretty good, because now you have the versatility of a 4/4, a 5/3, a 6/2, or a 7/1. Sign me up. Great card. I don't know if I first picked this, but it could be a high pick. Spellweaver Eternal. Another decent kind of curve filler 2-drop. Like, I have no problem with this card. It's a 2/1 for 2, which does feel, okay, maybe a slight bit weaker from the toughness side than I normally like, but it has prowess. That kind of makes up for it. It's also a zombie. There's times where that will matter. Blue's definitely playing a larger role in the whole zombie thing this time around, which I think is pretty interesting. Also has an Afflict 2. So, definitely has enough extra stuff going on in a 2-drop that I'd be more than happy to play it. Strategic Planning. This one's actually a reprint. I forgot when I first saw it, but yeah, it's a reprint from Portal 3 Kingdom. It did get another reprint, Commander 2013. That's where I played the card, where I'm more familiar with it. It was in one of those Commander 2013 decks, but overall, it's a fine card. It's sorcery speed, but only costs 2, so that's fine. I mean, it also can populate your graveyard, lets you dig for something. I really like the card. It could potentially at some point even see standard play again because it does populate graveyards. It's doing enough for 2 mana. Striped Riverwinder. I really like this common quite a bit, and I kind of wonder if this will have some implications in Pauper, considering it also has the cycling built in. I don't know. I guess we'll see, but it is really good. I mean, it's a 5/5 hexproof. Cycle it away for 1 blue. For some reason, you can't hit the casting cost, which is a little high. It's 7. But hexproof makes it difficult, especially if you can back it up with like a cartouche or something like that. This card could be actually really, really good for you, right? So, yeah, I'm happy to pick this up. If I have some cartouches, maybe even first pickable, it becomes a lot better if you have cartouches for sure. Especially like blue-black. Imagine playing like the black cartouche on this and giving it lifelink with already the hexproof built in and also the +1/+1. So now it's a 6/6. Yeah, that could be pretty sweet. So this is a real good card. You know what I like maybe the most about it is the art. It looks like new art in the background with old-timey Magic art in the foreground. And that makes me happy for some reason. I think it looks really awesome, actually. It looks very illustrated, like a lot of the old Magic cards, and I think that alone is pretty cool about it. A little too expensive for standard, but really good limited card. Alright, Supreme Will. This one's going to be a little controversial, because I don't really love this card for standard. I'll talk about limited in a second, but I'm going to talk about standard first this time. I want to love this card. Like, this feels like I should love this card. This is like right in my wheelhouse. It has options. Like, usually you put bullet points on a card and I'm like, I'll play it all day. I don't even have to read them. But my problem is there's so many good control cards right now in standard that, yes, this one is versatile, and I get what it's trying to do. It's trying to say, okay, early on, it's mana leak. Later on, though, if you can't really get much value out of the mana leak anymore because your opponent has too much mana out, then you get to look at the top 4 cards of your library, put one of them in your hand, the rest at the bottom. It's cool. It's a really cool idea, but I don't want to pay 3 for the mana leak. And I know mana leak at 2 is probably too powerful for this current environment, and I get it. They're definitely not going to print mana leak or something else for 2. That would be too powerful. They're not going to do that. So 3 is the only casting cost this really could be, at least the way the current rules text is. But I don't know. I'm underwhelmed. Maybe if the cards went into the graveyard as opposed to the bottom of the library, I'd be more interested. But I'm just not there. I'd rather just play a 3 casting cost like hard counterspell, which are out there and plentiful right now, as opposed to playing this, which is uncertain. So, I don't know. Let's talk about limited, though. I think it's great in limited, maybe even first pickable. Like, mana leak for 3 in limited is great, and again, if you need to dig for something, it helps you there too. So I'm all for it. Like I said, in draft, high pick, sealed, happy to play it. But I know a lot of people are high on this card in standard. I just can't get there. Maybe I'm wrong, but I just can't get there right now. Swarm Intelligence. This is maybe kind of like a fixed Dream Halls, kind of, sort of. It doesn't do the crazy sick combos. It just basically lets you fork anything you play. The problem is, it's an enchantment that costs 7 and does absolutely nothing on its own. I can't endorse that. So, even if I had a whole bunch of limited instants and sorceries in either draft or sealed, I can't say play a 7-drop that's relying on you to hopefully get those later in the game. It's just too inconsistent. Definitely too inconsistent for standard. It's a little interesting in Commander because there are some big spells there, and forking some big spells could be interesting, and getting the 7 mana isn't as hard, obviously, especially only 1 on color in Commander, so it might be fun to kind of play around with there, but I'm not super excited about this one. Tragic Lesson. Now this card I like. It's an instant. It costs 3, but at instant speed. It's a draw 2 and then discard, unless you return a land to its owner's hand, to one of your lands to its owner's hand. So, here's my thought on this card. First off, sometimes discarding, again, is good. We've seen that many, many times in blue, so you can kind of mitigate that at times. Secondly, there's a couple ways you can approach this card, one of which you hold back your mana, maybe you have a counter spell, and then your opponent doesn't play anything you want to counter, so at the end of your turn, you can play this at instant speed and get a little bit of card selection from it. Wonderful. Or you can actually play this on your main phase and tap your lands, play it, return one of the lands you tap to your hand, replay the land, and it comes back untapped. That's actually kind of cool too. So again, the card's versatile. I think it could potentially see some standard play. Maybe not right now, but perhaps post-rotation. Again, there's just a lot of competition right now in standard, but it's great for you in limited. You know, maybe not a first pick. It's more of a utility card, but pick this up, maybe middle of the pack. You'll be happy with it, and good and sealed, of course, too. And the art is just heartbreaking. What is going on with this, Wizards? the art and the flavor text. This is maybe the saddest Magic card I've ever seen. And there's something to be said for that, if nothing else. Unish Finks Sovereign. Okay, so this one's a mythic. I really like this card a lot, actually. You got a little Sphinx Travel going in there. I'm going to call that out once in a while. That could be relevant. But what I really like is, yes, I am paying one more for this 4/4 flyer than the one we saw previously. But I get a little mini Fact or Fiction when this enters the battlefield. That's kind of fun. Like, I'm on board for that. And that's an awesome advantage. Definitely worth 6 mana. I'd probably first pick this one, actually. Yeah, 6 mana, get a nice flyer, and also hopefully some card advantage out of it. Really, really nice card. And like I said, the Sphinx, other Sphinxes costing 2 less won't always be relevant, but I don't care. There's enough good stuff going on here. As far as standard goes, I feel like right now it's a little too expensive because there are some other really good high-end blue creatures out there. But again, in the future, post-rotation, I wouldn't be shocked if this saw a little bit of small play in standard. And of course, the last place I really like this is Commander. Again, this could be your Commander if you chose to. You can mess around with some more Sphinx with that other ability. Seems like it could be kind of fun. Unquenchable Thirst. This is fine for blue. Like, this is blue removal. It's not ideal all the time, but it will serve you well in a limited game, right? Now, if you're not playing with deserts, you kind of have to wait for your opponent to tap down the creature for this to really, truly be effective. Then you can throw it on the tap creature, and that creature won't untap. If you have deserts in play, either in play or in your graveyard, then you're able to tap the creature as you play it. That's even better. But again, it's not always necessary if this is all you have. So a card that gets better with deserts, still playable without them. And again, it's not a thrilling card by any means, but this is what blue has to do sometimes for removal purposes. Alright, here's a huge reprint. Unsummon. Unsummon is back, and it's been a long time. Now, this is one of the original Magic cards from Alpha Beta Unlimited, and it was in almost every core set from Alpha through Magic 2013. It was not in 9th edition for whatever reason. It was also in Conflux. But it's been since Magic 2013 that we've seen this in Standard. That's been a really long time. This is a phenomenal card. I mean, it's cheap. Return target creature to owner's hand. It's very simple, and you can kind of fill in the blanks from here, right? You either bounce your opponent's creature, bounce one of your creatures that's protected. Of course, it's at instant speed. That's awesome. You can bounce something of yours, maybe has a good enters battlefield effect you want to recast. There's just so much you can do. Bounce some of these tokens, like Eternalized tokens. It becomes 1 mana removal for tokens. That's phenomenal. So yeah, like, Unsummoned. I don't know what else to say about it. Yes, it's standard playable. It's very, very standard playable. And it's phenomenal in limited. Maybe even first pickable. Probably first pickable in a lot of packs. If you could find 1 or 2 or even 3 of these, if you're real lucky somehow, it is a common in a draft, like, you're going to have a pretty nice deck. Vizier of the Anointed. Another card I really like for limited, as long as I'm playing with Eternalize and Embalm. If I have enough targets for this, I'm happy to play it. If I don't, then there's probably other things I could be doing. But overall, it's a good card. It interacts great with the Embalm / Eternalize, almost like a tutor in a way for them. And then every time you actually use the ability, drawing the card. And it's got a nice size to it, 2/4 for 4. Nice little blocker for blue. Good card in general. Alright, Bloodwater Entity is the first of the multicolor cards we'll look at today. This one's an Is It in 1? It's a 2/2 with Flying and Prowess. So even though it's 2 different colors and it's asking for 3 mana, like, I'm okay with the card considering I'm getting Flying and Prowess out of it. And I'm happy to run it. It's probably not first pick or even second pick, maybe not even third pick in some packs for me, but it's a fine creature. Now, the ability is kind of neither here nor there for me because it's a little inconsistent. There's times it'll be good in sealed or draft, especially if you can sort of orchestrate a deck with some more instants and sorceries. But as long as you have a few targets for it, you at least have a chance of it hitting. But even if it didn't hit, I'd still play it for a 2/2 Flying Prowess for 3. I'd be totally fine with that. And when it hits, bonus on top, it's fine. I don't really think it's efficient enough for standard right now. Again, like, you look at Is It and standard, and it is stacked. Like, that deck is super stacked. I don't know if it needs something like this. Not to say someone might not try to work one or two of these in or something like that, but for the most part, this is another card that maybe has a better future than a present. The Locust God. Okay, here's one of the first gods that we're looking at. This one is bananas. Like, I don't even know where to start with this. Like, just read the card. It's good, and I should just move on, but I'll tell you why it's good. You already know why it's good. It's just really good. It's a 4/4 for 6. First off, it has the God Claw, so it goes to graveyard at the end of the turn. You get to put it in your hand. So, that's awesome. And yes, sure, it can still be exiled or what have you, but it's just very persistent and it's very hard to deal with. So that's a pain for your opponent to begin with. Now look at these abilities. First off, it's a 4/4 flyer on its own. It can just fly in for 4 and hit people. Anytime you draw a card, you get a 1/1 red-blue insect token with flying and haste. With flying and haste. This is nuts. And then finally, that mana sink. Oh yeah, if you wanted to make tokens and loot at the same time, have at it for a red, a blue, and 2. Just loot and make yourself a flying haste token and call it a day. Like, what are they doing here? This card's amazing. Yes, it's a little mana intensive, but it's doing so much. And just the combos that you can think of with all the card drawing. First off, the looting in itself, again, we've seen many times where discarding is an advantage for other cards. So that's definitely worth noting. But even if it's not, looting is still amazingly good. Then on top of it, I mean, drawing cards and making haste creatures. Imagine playing like Pull from Tomorrow. I mean, that could simply be a win condition. This card is definitely seeing standard play. This card is incredible in Commander. Great Commander for sure. Limited? Yes. First pick. If you get this, first pick it up, take it. It's going to be amazing for you, right? Sealed, if you're lucky enough to open it, you're having a great day. I don't know what else to say. The card's awesome. It might start to get a little too expensive for like the World of Modern or something like that, but all these other places, it's amazing. Alright, Nicol Bolas God Pharaoh. Okay, this is kind of awkward timing because I want to hype up this card and say, like, it's Nicol Bolas, he should be amazing, and we just saw this other amazing card. And Nicol Bolas is good, don't get me wrong, he's a good card, but he's very expensive at 7. He's a Grixis and 4. It's really hard to cast. If you cast him, you're having a good day, though. He's a good card, and he's got 4 abilities. You don't see that all too often on Planeswalkers, but they're good ones. He comes in with 7 loyalty counters on him, so that's awesome. For 7 mana, you get 7 loyalty. The +2 automatically gets him up to 9. Really, really good. That +2 is maybe a little inconsistent. It could hit something good. It could hit something that's not helpful at all. You just don't really know, but still, you're also getting 2 loyalty counters, so who cares, right? Like, the +2 is just fine. The +1 is good in multiplayer games. Feels like, I mean, still good in single player, but feels like it has a bigger impact on, say, Commander games. -4, that is a way to protect himself, so that's good. A little expensive, taking away 4 counters to do so, but it can be done, so that's important. And of course, that -12 is pretty bonkers, and hopefully you win the game if you are able to hit that. My biggest issue is just the casting cost. So, can you get Nicol Bolas out? If you feel like you can, definitely play him, but not every deck's going to be able to pull it off. Now, this set does give you some tools to help you get there with these Grixis colors a little bit. We're going to look at least one land later that helps with that, a filter land, but know your deck. If you get this early and maybe you can pick up other things in your draft to help fix your colors, maybe ramp you a little bit, which is a little awkward because a lot of the ramps in green, which of course isn't Grixis. But still, there's other things out there like artifacts that give you mana of different colors and such. There's options. You just have to start working to get those options into your deck. And once you get there, you could have a great time with this card, but there's going to be times where you get this card maybe in sealed, or maybe you pick it up in like pack 3 of a draft that you're not going to be able to swing playing it. And that's kind of sad because the card's amazing if you can get it on the battlefield. So that's the only thing. Like, yeah, if you can swing it and you can cast it, play it. It's awesome. But I guess don't overpress your mana to do it. If you can't do it in your deck, well, you sadly can't do it. So don't let it draw you in and become a dead card in your hand most of the time or all the time. That's the only word of warning I'd give. As for Standard, again, it's just super expensive for that format right now. If there was a way to cheat it in, like Etherworks Marvel, that might be different, but of course that got banned. So, I don't know. If someone can think of an economical way to get this into play, then maybe it might see Standard play because it is good enough. But I don't know if we have the tools right now. Perhaps in the future we will. As for Commander, though, this is awesome, right? And like I said, it does impact at times each opponent. That's always kind of nice. I mean, look at that -12 in a game of Commander. That can be kind of awesome, too, if you could get there. But yeah, in Commander, again, your mana is a little more flexible. You have a little more time to build up a plan like this, and it could really excel there. All right, another god. This one's the Scarab God, and I mentioned earlier that blue is taking a larger role when it comes to zombies in this set, maybe a little more so than Amonkhet. I think that's cool. I mean, you see more Eternalized cards than you saw necessarily in Bomb cards last time. You see cards that interact with zombies like this one. And this is actually a pretty cool card. Not to mention, it's hard to find 5/5s for 5 in these colors, in black and blue. So that in itself is actually kind of nice. And being able to go into any graveyard and eternalize something is actually kind of awesome. It costs 4 mana, but that's reasonable. And again, much like the other gods, this is very persistent and hard to deal with. And that first ability can't be understated too. Once you start getting some zombies, doing a little damage, but scrying can be a big deal. And then as you go further and further, doing more damage, as long as this thing is alive, it becomes kind of out of control kind of quick. I don't know if I'm as hyped about it as the last god we just saw, but this one is really good. And I do think it's worth, as long as zombie decks can still hang in the new meta. They had a few issues recently with Sweltering Suns and Chandra Flamecaller, but if they can hang in there, if they can stick it out, and maybe splash some blue in their decks. This card is definitely standard playable, and yeah, first pickable in draft. Another amazing limited card. Don't pass this one up. Finally, Commander. Yeah, again, this could be your Commander. Great for Zombie Tribal. Alright, Consigned to Oblivion. Another card I like. In some ways, we just saw Unsummon, so this is in the same vein. It costs 2 at instant speed, but it does any non-land permanent to its owner's hand. So it adds a little bit more flexibility for that 1 mana, but it's still very, very good. I think potentially could see standard play. Great for you, again, in limited. Could be a high draft to pick up as well. Maybe not first pick, but definitely a higher pick if you know you're in blue. That Oblivion side is just bonus tacked on. Like 5 to force an opponent to discard 2 cards feels a little overcosted, but you know what? That's not why I'm playing it. I'm playing it for the consign. Every once in a while, the Oblivion will just be a nice bonus. Reason to Believe. This one's okay. In some ways not as exciting as the last card, which is kind of funny because this one's rare and the last one was uncommon. But the idea behind this card is it wants you to really play this for 6 and then scry 3, put a really good creature on top, and then cheat it into play with the second side. And if you can do that, wonderful. Problem is you could miss. You're only going down 3 deep, which isn't super exciting. In limited, you probably have a good chance of hitting something, but is it something worth 6 mana, I guess is the question. Although you don't want to understate, too, that you're also setting up maybe your next couple draws with the scries, or scrying away some lands at the end of the game when you're flooded or something like that. So scrying is always good. I could see myself running this in certain decks, especially if I have some higher casting cost creatures in the deck, but it's not for every deck. It's a card that will be played some of the time, but not always. God Pharaoh's Gift. Interesting card. Costs 7, so there's a little mana investment here, but as long as you have targets in your graveyard, every combat step that you have, you get to eternalize one of them, and it gives it haste. And it doesn't go away. I think that's worth noting, because usually cards like this, like token will come back, you attack with it, and then it goes away at end of turn. That's not the case. It sticks around, so it's actually pretty cool. Works great again with different enters the battlefield effects as well, and zombies. So it's doing a lot. It is costing you 7, but I will say this. As long as you have a target in your graveyard, at least it's doing something the turn it comes into play. So that's actually kind of nice. It doesn't necessarily help you if you're behind and you're already losing from a defensive point of view that well for 7 mana. I mean, it might give you one more creature to block with or something, or give you a good enters the battlefield effect. But this is a little bit better, more probably in like stalemates or board stalls than anything. So, or a win more card for sure. So the awkward side is you might not have any targets for some reason. So I guess you have to kind of think about that. But all in all, pretty good card. I could see myself definitely playing it in limited, where you know you're going to have a lot of creatures in most decks, and you should have enough targets for this to actually make sense. As long as I don't have anything better on the higher end of my curve that's a little more consistent, then I'll probably run this. If I'm worried about its consistency, maybe I'm running more instants of sorceries, like I'm in Is It Colors or something like that, then I may avoid this one. I do think for standard, this one's a little too high costed and a little too high variance to get there. Graven Abomination. This one is interesting. Like, maybe this is a sideboard card for me if my opponent's running a lot of Embalm, Eternalize, Aftermath, stuff like that. If I'm worried about a particular card in the graveyard, this might be a card I sideboard in. Other than that, it's a little weak because I'm paying 3 for a 3/1. And when I do need to get rid of that particular card, because it is target card from defending player's graveyard, then I attack with it and I get rid of it. My opponent's probably going to just block this with like a 1 or 2 toughness creature that they probably paid 1 or 2 for. So I'm not getting a lot of advantage unless I'm targeting something really important in their graveyard. And again, if this is on the battlefield, that kind of telegraphs what you're doing, which could change their play, which means that situation might not come up. So yeah, it's a little awkward. But again, I might board it in if I'm really concerned with what's coming out of my opponent's graveyard. All right, let's look at some lands. We have Crypt of the Eternals. I alluded to this earlier, but if you are trying to play maybe Gods or Bolas, this is a good kind of filter land to help you get there with the Grixis colors. It doesn't slow you down either because it lets you tap it for colorless mana if you need to, which is kind of nice. Might be a little annoying if you get it early and you're trying to hit your colors, but for the most part, the card will be fine. All right, Desert and Mindfell. This is a cycle. We talked about the white one yesterday, so I don't want to spend too much time on this one. Basically the same thing. If you're in the desert game plan and you need some deserts, well, this is a good desert and it gives you blue mana. Slows you down a little bit, but at least it gives you blue mana, or you can cycle away too, which is good. Endless Sands. I'll take a quick moment to say cards like this, a lot of times people say, well, why don't I just play it no matter what? Because it's just a land with upside. I'm going to play 17 lands anyway in my deck usually, so why not make this one of them? Well, that's true if you're playing maybe like a 2-color deck and your colors are pretty even. Like instead of doing like 9 forests and 8 swamps, you end up doing 8 and 8 in the Endless Sands. I think that's just fine. No matter what Endless Sands did, it's just bonus at that point. But if you're going deep, you're trying to go 3rd color or splashing or something like that, this does eat into your color requirements if you make it one of your lands. You could always make it one of your spells and put it in the spell slot, but again, there's a lot of utility lands that aren't as good as spells you could be playing, so a lot of times that doesn't matter. Now, this card in particular, it's a fine card. It's a nice way to protect your creatures against potential removal. So if your opponent has a removal spell, and this is on the battlefield, and you have mana up, basically it turns the removal spell into a tempo spell. Now, sometimes tempo spells can be just as destructive to you as a removal spell can be, especially if you're low on life. So this won't be all end all save you. But like I said, sometimes it's just upside for the sake of having upside, so why not have it if it's not hurting your color base, right? So yeah, it's a decent card. It reminds me a lot of Safe Haven from back in the day. It's not bad at all, especially with some good enters battlefield effects. You can get some extra value out of it. So there's a lot you can do with it overall. And again, it doesn't slow you down. It does still tap for colorless mana. Next is Ibnu Rivulet. This is part of a cycle. We saw the white one yesterday in the video. But if you're trying to play with some Desert Matters cards and you're looking for deserts that aren't going to slow you down, these are good choices because they don't come into play tapped. They can tap for colorless mana, or you can pay a life and tap to get the mana of the chosen color out of it, in this case blue. That's kind of nice. This one's a mill card too. For a blue and 1, you tap it in Sackett Desert. So that could be this desert, could be a different desert, but then target player will put the top 4 cards of his or her library in his or her graveyard. So we were talking earlier about perhaps trying to draft that mill deck. I don't know if I'd recommend it, but this is a card that you certainly could use in that capacity, or you could use it to mill yourself a little bit to try to hit some things into your graveyard. There are going to be times where that matters as well. And having said that, those are the cards for today. We did it. We got to the blue cards and then some. So we're going to be back tomorrow where we look at all the black cards. The next day, of course, we'll do red and then finally green. And we'll get the whole set in. After that, we're going to do our pre-release primer. It's really geared for new players that maybe have never gone to a pre-release before. And we're also going to talk about invocations in that video too. So if you want my thoughts on some of those, you may want to check that out. And we have some market watches coming up at the end of next week too. I have my July picks of the month. as well as a special Hour of Devastation episode, and then the regular Market Watch next Saturday. So a lot going on. Stay tuned. Until next time, thanks for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe, and have a great day. Hey, thanks for watching. This video is made possible by the generous support of viewers like you on Patreon. Check out the description below for links to our Patreon page as well as our Amazon affiliate store, where a small percentage of all sales will also help support the channel. Finally, if you haven't had a chance yet to subscribe, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any new videos on Heroes and Legends. Talk to you again soon, and have a great day.